Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing conversations on the cultures of consciousness. So, how do you feel about Miley Cyrus? This question came to me the other day during a conversation with our guest today. And I had, I didn't really care that much about Miley Cyrus, but then I started to think about her a little bit more and kind of go, is she a tool or is she a provocateur? Did she capitulate to the hyper-sexualized, big entertainment cheese machine that popular culture has become in so many ways? Or did she instead, in a kind of spirit of punk rock, use, play, twist, and tantalize? Not so much in a sexual way, although she's doing that as well, but really playing with the whole situation. And I don't know. The jury is out in my world, but I want you to contemplate that, because I think we're going to come back to it in our conversation today with our guest, Polly Superstar, who we have had on the show before. If you're a devoted listener, you will remember Polly from a couple of years ago, probably almost 3 years ago now. And just to give her a little biographical background, Polly's a 21st century sex culture revolutionary. And as we'll hear, she has worked as a latex fashion designer, a creator of arty, sexy parties, and a spokesperson for sex culture. And it's precisely in that role, someone who is speaking about and creating the context for different kind of sex culture than what you probably think of when I say that term, that makes her work so interesting and makes me so excited to say that she has her first book out, Polly's Sex Cultural Revolutionary, which just came out by Polly Whittaker, which is her real last name, although I still think that her real last name is Superstar, because she is a superstar. And so we'll be getting to talk with Polly in just a second, but before we do, I'd like to bring on our co-host on Expanding Mind, Maja Daou. Hi, Maja.
Hi, Erik.
So what do you think about Miley Cyrus? I mean, it's particularly interesting for parents. Like I have a friend who's about my age, and he has kids, and I remember when the twerking event happened, and he just happened to be in town. I hadn't seen him for a while. We were walking around, and he was genuinely shocked. Like, I could tell that there were like millions of parents who had this cutesy association with Miley Cyrus, and then suddenly there's this transformation, and they were like, they didn't know how to deal with it. Like, it was sort of like and he loves pop culture. He loves sex culture. He's not a prude guy at all, but it was still shocking for him. So she is kind of an interesting character that way. Do you have any reactions?
Yeah, it was funny. In fact, I remember when it happened, there was this female punk rock matriarch, who I won't name her name, just so that it doesn't contribute to gossip, but she wrote this very reactionary letter against Miley Cyrus, like kind of, talking trash on her whole thing. And it was just so funny, because this punk rock matriarch, if you looked back into her past and history, had pretty much, there was pictures of her in similar types of outfits, doing all kinds of sensationalistic things and all those kinds of things. But, her contention was that she was real, she felt it, and hers was, like, legit, and that Miley Cyrus was this poser of, orchestration of production, and that was this big kind of reaction. It was more a reaction against the production value than the actual, sexual exploitation of it. And I think a lot of the, goody two-shoes parents you're talking about that had that reaction, it's also their own denial of sexuality and that kind of shadow they were acting against. I think not necessarily Miley Cyrus, but for this punk rock matriarch, I was like, wow, you're so mad at everything that you did yourself that now is like commonplace or like ordinary. So I think it was funny, like making Miley Cyrus do what she did actually kind of just like made regular this kind of sexual activity, and everyone's like, oh yeah, I guess, that is just what all of the women in entertainment are doing. They kind of go in that direction.
It's totally true. I mean,
that's
the logic of our culture in a lot of ways right now, is like that there are things that are kind of quote unquote shocking, like a lot of people in the States had never seen twerking or whatever, and it is the first time you see it sort of shocking, and then you're like, whatever, oh, it's just dancing, it's just another kind of sexy dancing and whatever, and then it just becomes like an ordinary and that's just so much about how our cultures now, and it's so quickly things circulate through it. But I think you're being too, though I love the phrase punk rock matriarch, I think there's no reason to hide the name of our bald friend, because she wrote a public letter, right? It was she posted, it was a public. So let's call her out, because it's going to come up later in the show. Sinead O'Connor.
Is it? Yeah. It's so funny. I know, it's ridiculous. But anyway.
No, I think you're very. I like your politeness. It's good.
And I mean, you could see it from all the letters, all of the matriarchs. We had Sinead O'Connor, the one was Anne Magnuson. Like all these kind of matriarchs that had also done shocking behaviors were reacting to it, which I thought was just interesting.
Yeah, it's totally good, because it's as much about pop culture and media culture as it is about sexuality. But we're already having the conversation, so let's bring Polly into it. Hey, Polly, welcome to Expanding Mind.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, since we're already talking about this story, since you and I had a conversation about this just a couple days ago, and it really got me going. I went and I watched the whatever that Sledgehammer video is. I'm sorry, I don't remember it. And I realized that I saw the whole thing differently because of the conversation we had. Now we've already established the way that the punk rock matriarch weighed in on the Miley Cyrus affair, poo-pooing it, saying she's a tool of the industry, she should have more self-respect, blah, blah, blah. And this led to the next interesting move in the story, which I would like you to carry forward.
Well, the next move was that Amanda Palmer then wrote a letter, an open letter. There were lots of open letters happening at the time. And Amanda Palmer wrote an open letter to Sinead O'Connor, kind of giving her a little slap on the wrist and saying, hey, as women living in this complicated time, we should really be looking out for each other rather than, slut-shaming each other and saying that what we're doing is wrong, and basically saying that she didn't see Miley Cyrus as a product of industry. She saw her more as kind of a train wreck. And it was like another perspective on the story, because I think that it is a complicated time for us right now as women being sexualized in culture, and the way that women are perceived in a sexual way as sexual objects, especially, pop stars like Miley Cyrus. And in a way, I felt like she was just, I feel like Miley Cyrus just doesn't give a fuck. She's just like, whatever. And she actually sent this she reposted back to Sinead O'Connor, tweeting these awful tweets from a couple of years ago when Sinead O'Connor had a really public mental breakdown. And just basically retweeted those tweets like, hey, you're a crazy lady, and it was just like, wow, Miley is just so, I don't think she's a product of the industry at all, actually. I believe that she's kind of a product of her own upbringing and her own young fame and of celebrity culture,
Yeah, and in that sense, it's really impossible for any of us to judge, because we have absolutely no idea what it's like to become a person, become an adult, or even become a teenager with this degree of attention, and not just. There have been child stars for forever, but there's something particular about our moment. And what I got out of this conversation with you was how, I hadn't paid that much attention to her. I mostly just saw it as just another cheesy, degrading event in pop culture. But then after we had that conversation, I went back and looked at the stuff. I was like, you're right. It's not It's like she's genuinely punk rock, which is partly what makes the Sinead O'Connor thing so funny, because by what I mean by genuine is not only is she sort of like doesn't give a shit and is just doing what she wants to do, but there is a train wreck, a genuine, authentic train wreck quality to the whole situation. So it was a very interesting back and forth. But then you, Polly, weighed in with another open letter.
Yeah, I sent then an open letter to everybody, but it was an open letter to sex. And the idea being that, like, right now in culture, sexuality is in such a complicated place. I kind of, like, addressed sex itself, like, hey, sex, you know, I know life is kind of weird for you right now in this post-revolutionary kind of, fit that you're having. You don't really know where you stand, and it must be very difficult for you to express yourself. And because I feel like this is the core issue here. It's not really about a person or whether what she's doing is right or wrong, or whether what other people have done is right or wrong. It's about where sexuality is in our culture right now, which is mixed messages. I mean, we get totally mixed messages. On the one hand, we have to be sexy to be successful, and on the other hand, we have to not be too sexy, but then you don't want to be a prude, but then you don't want to, like, it's like there's nowhere that you can sit comfortably in our culture and feel like positive about your sexuality. There's always somebody who's going to criticize you for something. You're always doing it wrong, especially women. Women are always just doing it wrong. Too sexy, not sexy enough, you know? And so I felt like I just needed to make that statement that, like, Miley, in a way...
Can you let the listeners know, is there somewhere people can go online to read your letter?
Oh, yeah, it's on my blog, which is at pollysuperstar.com.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and it was retweeted a bunch of times and kind of got out there, which I was really stoked about because it was kind of a hilarious conversation that was going on at the time with all the open letters. And I loved Anne Magnuson's open letter to open letters. Oh my God, that was hilarious. Go find that one too, because that was just hilarious.
Yeah. This whole question of sex culture, where we are with it, it's such a big, so overwhelming right now, because we can feel the way that media and self-promotion and business and all these things are wrapped up with the increasing intensity of sexual imagery, of the availability of pornography, of the pornization of more mainstream images. I mean, I still think we don't really know. Depending on when you grow up, it's like if you grew up before the internet, you can't imagine what it's like to grow up with the internet, and I'm sure that if you grew up with the internet and all the availability of images and events, that it's impossible to imagine not having it be part of your sexual culture. And as a society, we're still just even wrestling with that single thing, just the availability of these images online and how it changes behavior and expectations and self-presentation and all that. So there's just so much going on, which is why I'm so happy for your book, for your memoir, and that you didn't write. You could have written a screed or a rant or a political statement, but really what you did is you wrote about yourself. You wrote about your own transformative experiences and your own transformation as somebody invested in different kinds of sex culture. And in telling that story, you raise a lot of these questions, and you show the variation and the different possibilities that go on there. So, I want to congratulate you on your book, and also maybe invite you now to read a kind of a passage from it or something that sort of sets the stage.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So this is a section from the beginning of the book, from the introduction. Okay, and it starts, "It's true. I throw parties where people have sex. We fuck all together in a big room with lots of beds. There are dark corners for shy people and exposed areas for exhibitionists. One of the rooms is a dungeon where we tie each other up to specially designed furniture. We call it the fungeon. Some people like to spank each other or use crops and floggers. Some prefer a softer touch with feathers or silk. But sex culture isn't just about sex. It's about art, community, spirituality, relationships, gender, family, self-expression, and most importantly, love. Sex is a normal and healthy part of life, and sometimes it can also be difficult. Sex culture isn't going to tell you what's right or wrong or put you in a box. It just acknowledges that human beings are designed to be sexual. We have a spectrum of self-expression available to us, and sexuality is part of it. Whether that's exploring the smorgasbord of sexual opportunities like an adventurer, or choosing to stay celibate until you meet someone who really makes your knees wobble. Sex culture supports all choices and orientations between consenting adults and sees them as part of a complex, cross-cultural, sensual, and aesthetic exploration. Sex is something to sing songs about and write poetry to. The superficial story of Kinky Salon would be a fun read. A sordid, tell-all expose of the interpersonal drama that inevitably comes from so many people fucking would be riveting, no doubt. A chronology of my sexual exploits might satisfy some prying curiosity seekers. Apologies in advance if that's what you're looking for. Although much of this story is set in a modern world of open relationships, sexy parties, and alternative lifestyle, that's not what it's about. You might be surprised to hear that the majority of people who come to Kinky Salon don't come to get laid. They are deep hedonists. They come for the community, connection, and sense of family. Wait, now it sounds like a weird sex cult. Fuck it, maybe it is a weird sex cult, but it's my weird sex cult.
No, I love that. I love the multi-dimensions you have there, and just to let people know, because you mentioned it, we haven't talked about it, what exactly is Kinky Salon?
Okay, so Kinky Salon is a party that I've been throwing in San Francisco for about 12 years now. There are events happening all over the world, across Europe and America too, but it's basically a progression of the sexual revolution. It's a party where sex is integrated into the social fabric of the event, and it's a very creative event too. So there's costuming and a cabaret, so it's like a creative, arty sex party. Does
Great.
that accurately describe it, Eric?
What's that?
I said, does that accurately describe it?
I think it's a good description. I mean, it's in a way probably the easiest connotation for people is that it's a more of a Burning Man style sex party than a gothic rock or industrial kind of sex party, and so it has that tremendous social playfulness and highly costumed.
And it's definitely it's definitely a product of San Francisco, like Burning Man is, and it's definitely grown alongside Burning Man, but it's not really a Burning Man event. Like, we're not associated with Burning Man. We don't have a camp at Burning Man. I've never thrown a Kinky Salon at Burning Man because I just don't think that it's really possible to create a safe container at Burning Man, and safety and comfort is something that's really important at a Kinky Salon. So the association is there because we're both products of San Francisco, and so we're both kind of like in that same community together, but it's not specifically a Burning Man event.
Yes, that's definitely true. Well, I thought one way of kind of also setting off what is specific about Kinky Salon and the San Francisco part of the story is to highlight the way that one of the cool things about your book is by telling your own personal story, you're actually telling the story of different kinds of sex culture. So when you're younger in London in the 90s, this is sort of the first phase when you get into a very different kind of scene for very different kinds of reasons. So I thought maybe we could talk about that, go back in time a bit and talk a little bit about that and what drove you to get into the London scene, and then that really sets up what changes when you move to San Francisco.
Right. Well, when I was in London, I was, younger, and I had kind of a traumatic period where my father was very sick for a long time and then finally died when I was 16. And so as I was hitting puberty, I was incredibly rebellious and angry and wanting to fight back and at the world. And I started just being like a wild child, and I discovered the fetish scene really young. I was actually at there's a club in London now called the Torture Garden, which is kind of the quintessential fetish club, and I was at the very first one, and I'm friends with all the people that run it, so that was like way back in the day. I was like at the very beginning of that London fetish scene just as it started to explode. And to me, it was something really rebellious, something really new. Like nothing had been seen like that before. Like the idea of people getting together in a club and like tying each other up and beating each other and being sexual around each other was so taboo. It was crazy. Like patent 6-inch high heels were only worn by prostitutes, Now you see people walking down the street, people wear them to offices, I'm always shocked. I see people wearing those stiletto heels and I'm like, oh my God, like look at that. Like how did that happen in the last however many years that became so mainstream? But, like that kind of fashion and like just walking around the streets of London, like it was a very rebellious move for me to do that. And I was also like frustrated and wanting to explore new territory, so that was really what the fetish scene was all about for me. But what I discovered in the fetish scene was a world where this incredibly rebellious and, kind of angry teenager could actually be quite safe, because implicit in the events is this understanding that women are in charge, or it was at the time in London. It was a very female-dominated scene, and the men were more submissive, the females were more dominant. And the idea was, that there was this caveat to like if you wanted to explore this world, then you had to understand respect women, respect them, and don't act in the way that people normally do. I mean, in our culture, there's this epidemic of ass grabbing. I mean, it's just out of control in bars and in clubs that people just take for granted as being normal. Like women are just grabbed all the time. Whereas in the fetish scene,
is that worse? Is that worse?
Is that worse?
Yeah, you think it's worse now? It's getting worse.
I don't know, because I don't hang out in bars anymore, and I just refuse to hang out in those places. I don't know if it's getting worse. I think it's it's something.
Let me ask you this question, Polly, if you can or have had this experience. I wonder if you can like pinpoint or articulate if you have been to sex parties where it is male dominant, like if you have attended any events where the sexual theme was male dominant and how the energy was there as compared to, say, a kinky salon. I know you're like talking about, the general kind of cultural view of sexuality, which of course is the ass grab, but have you been to like a specifically focused male dominant sex party as opposed to the energy present at kinky salon? How would you kind of like sum that up?
Well, I mean, I think that in general in our culture, we're male dominant, obviously. So everywhere you go, you're in male dominant culture. But specifically, a lot of the sex clubs that are like swinger parties, although even if some of them claim to be like female centric, often it's male fantasy that's happening. So women are there for the pleasure and entertainment of men, and even if the women are encouraged to explore and to maybe explore their bisexuality and be together, again, it's as a male fantasy rather than as even if the women are enjoying it, they're still fulfilling this male fantasy. And I mean, to take it to an extreme, I've been to clubs, like really sleazy sex clubs, where there's literally one woman to 20 guys, and the guys are like literally follow you around and like pester you and wait, they follow you around, like waiting for you to have sex with somebody. Like, what's she gonna do? Where's she gonna go? You know, and where you're totally just an object in their fantasy. Whereas Kinky Salon is much more about exploration without objectification, and I think it's a really complicated issue for our culture right now. This question of like, well, I don't understand. It's sexy. What's wrong with being sexy, right?
Well, that's why I think it's so important to articulate that difference, because I think most people have no idea that there is a difference in that.
Okay.
So, right?
So
like
the difference between sexual attraction and sexual objectification is, with attraction, you actually care about who that person is as a person and what their needs and wants and desires are. Whereas with sexual objectification, you see them purely as an object for your pleasure. So, for example, you know, an image of, like most images of women in advertising, you don't get a sense of the personality of the woman. You don't get a sense of like, wow, she seems like a nice girl. You just get like a giant pair of disembodied lips or something. It's just like pure, it's just like, this is just an object to sell. And, you know, it's also with like burlesque performance. Like, why is burlesque performance okay, but like a seedy strip joint isn't okay? Like, what's the difference? Ultimately, it's just women taking their clothes off. And the difference is, you know, at a seedy strip joint, you'll have women who are all similarly bodied, so they'll all look the same, and they'll all be moving in the same way, which is a way that has been pre-described as what is sexual, and they'll be doing it for the pleasure of men. Whereas burlesque performance, if you go to a burlesque show, most of the people in the audience are other burlesque performers. Like, the burlesque performers are actually performing for each other. And the way that they're performing is they're doing shows and skits with creativity where their personality shines through, and they're just full of character. And so that's the difference, is like, you watch the show and you're like, what you're getting more than just like, wow, that's a hot body, is this woman is funny, or this woman is expressing something to me in a creative way, you know?
Right.
So yeah, objectification, I think, is a really important issue and really kind of a touch point right now in our culture, as to, you know, and the confusion over what exactly it is. You know, that's the biggest problem, is like, people are just like, they don't even understand what sexual objectification is, and therefore the problem is kind of like the pink elephant in the room of our culture, you know?
Well, and would you say that Oh, go ahead. I mean, I was just going to say, do you think that's a result of the predominant culture? And if we could somehow provide an alternative culture, do you think that would help kind of like push that out or resolve it in some manner?
I think it's a cycle that we're going through right now that is really important, and it's where we are on the point in the sexual revolution. So if sexuality has been repressed for as long as it has, and where, you know, sex was like literally illegal, you know, fornication was a crime punishable by public courts for many, many years. And now we're at a point where, you know, the sexual revolution happened in the 60s. People are now accepting that people have sex and that that's okay and that it's natural and normal. And the idea that married couples can have sex, like, wow, and actually enjoy it, this is like a whole new thing for this generation, you know? It's crazy to us because we're children of that generation. So, but our parents were raised with the idea that, I mean, my mother was told to lie back and think of England, literally. so think of England.
Oh my God,
it's true. And so as this revolution turns, you know, now we have accepted that sexuality is an okay thing. We are and what happened is the power of sexuality kind of took over and resulted in us being bombarded with sexual imagery, but without the understanding of gender equality and of women specifically being seen as sexual objects in this way. So the sexual revolution happened, and the immediate result was to suddenly have all this crazy objectification just everywhere in a way that's just shocking. Like, if 100 years ago they could have seen the kind of ads that we have on the street, they would have just been like, oh my God, this is crazy. And it is crazy because it's confused, because it's in this like post-sexual revolution confusion where it's, it doesn't know where it stands. Like, sexuality it doesn't know where it stands in culture anymore. It was very clear before. It was very clear cut. Sex was bad. That was very easy to understand. And now it's like, well, sex is good, but it's complicated. And I think that level of complication is something that's happening all over culture. And the transformation from kind of dualistic, understanding of how the world works, like that is good, that is bad, that is black, that is white, is now our brains are developing to be able to understand more complexity. And I think the biggest point that we have right now to really exemplify this is what's going on with gender politics, because there was always man and woman, and now mainstream people are starting to understand that there's more than just man and woman. And I think that when humanity reaches a point where they can comprehend the complexities of gender, then I think we'll be able to apply that to other parts of life too, and be like, okay, well, if gender is like that, now we can understand this as being like that. And it'll kind of open up a world of non-dualistic understanding.
Well, one way that I've come to understand it, and what's particular about the social alchemy of Kinky Salon in relationship to this objectification issue, is that obviously if you're finding someone physically attractive, there's an element of the object relation, meaning like there's a thing there. It's physical. It's meaty. It's delicious. It's inspiring. It's evocative. And if that's all that's going on, then you have the situation of objectification that you're talking about. Whereas what you want is a kind of playfulness around that, so that you see that even if you look at a body and find them incredibly attractive, immediately, instantly, the erotic fantasy is fulfilled in that moment. It's in seeing the person behind that situation and then playing with that difference. And one really striking distinction between Salon and a lot of other sex scenes is that there's a lot of humor and playfulness as opposed to a lot of heaviness and seriousness. Is that people are kind of locked into like their shtick or their fetish, and they're like, wow, I'm there, and there's this kind of sense of heaviness about it. And I think that playfulness is what allows people to both inhabit the way they are objects for other people's eyes, but then also be playful, ironic. There's a difference between just being an object and playing with your own object potential, and that kind of sense of irony, or that sense of being like, it's not just about what I'm looking at or what I'm physically vibing with, but also trying to understand or get a glimpse of who's behind that, who's behind that wink or that mischievous look. And it's similar to gender politics in the sense that now I know myself, where I like, if I see someone who's obviously trans in a way that I can't really identify necessarily which direction it's going, like I have to go, here's a person, they're presenting in a certain way, and I have my reaction to that, but I wonder who they are. How do they feel about who they are, who they're presenting? And so it opens it up, so I can't just slop them into some kind of prefabricated category. Oh, they're just that thing. It's an object, that kind of person. Instead, I don't know that the ambiguity of gender in our world, I think this is maybe a more optimistic reading, but the ambiguity of gender in our world now is an invitation to ask that question. Well, who's the person behind this body, or with this body, or working through this body, or expressing the body, however you want to do it, not to be too dualistic about my language. But It's about being able to see the person in the body as well as just the body.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that specifically this issue around gender that is becoming so mainstream. I mean, it was like on the cover of Time magazine. Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine. I mean, you can't get more mainstream than that. You know, and that people in America are actually like starting to comprehend that complexity, I think, is a really telling shift in consciousness.
Well, these are all really great issues. We got to take a break right now. You're listening to Expanding Mind with Erik Davis and Maja Daou. We're talking with Polly Whittaker about her new book, Polly, and we'll be right back after this.
Welcome back to Expanding Minds on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm Maja Daou here with Erik Davis, and we're speaking with Polly Superstar today. Yay! About sex culture. So can you tell us a little bit, Polly, about your personal experience with sharing this information and trying to encourage education about it? Like, I'm sure the book in and of itself is achieving a big part of that for you. How are people like kind of reacting? Have you been able to see that it's shifted people and helped, or do people react in a in a shocked, like Miley Cyrus sort of way?
Well, the book hasn't actually been released yet. It's coming out on September 22nd. And I kind of live in a bubble. Like, I live in San Francisco. I surround myself with progressive people, and I forget what the rest of the world is like, because the experience that I have is very different. Like, San Francisco has always been a sexually progressive town since it was founded. It's all like the Barbary Coast. You know, San Francisco was the first place to allow the distribution and viewing of pornography. It was the first place to have topless dancing. I mean, it's been a city of firsts when it comes to sexuality, and obviously it was the home of the sexual revolution. So there's an attitude in this town that's very different around sexuality, and I'm pretty supported here. Like, I get a lot of positive feedback for what I do, and I'm very aware that as I reach out into other cities, my kinky salon parties are happening now in other cities around the world, in Portland and in New Orleans as well, and New York, and in Europe. And I'm aware of the difference in attitudes in these towns, and how reaching that wider audience is definitely going to start to expose me to more criticism. But I haven't hit it yet. I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for the puritanical backlash to what I do, which is, I think, is, if I'm successful, is inevitable.
Well, it's interesting. Go ahead, Erik.
Oh, we can. I was just going to say, I'm really also interested in hearing your experience of about writing a book. I mean, you weren't a writer; you didn't write that often, and certainly hadn't taken on a big book before. And I'm curious how that publishing a book, putting yourself out there in that way, is very different than being in a scene, throwing parties, maybe even giving talks. There's something sort of solid about it, and it's like exposed about it in a way. So I'm really curious how, given your background and all the adventures you've been through, what it was like to try to write about that and try to put it so much from you back out into the world of writing.
Yeah, and this is an incredibly personal memoir too. It's not just a titillating kind of surface story. It's incredibly personal. It dives really deep into my childhood, into the death of my father, and into my own sexuality and my own sexual trauma, my own, issues that I've had around relationships, and it's about my personal relationships. It's a very, very personal story, and the process of going from writing it, which is incredibly introverted, where you spend a lot of time on your own and you're kind of just having personal revelations, and being very self-reflective, compared to how it is now that the book is finished and being out in the world and having people be like, come up to me in places and be like, I read your book, and I'm like, oh, wow, because now all of a sudden they're like my best friend because they know all my secrets and all my stories. And it's a very strange sensation to have such a vulnerable, personal piece of writing be public. And yeah, it's I kind of knew that it would be that way when I started going deep into the writing, and it started to come out the way that it was coming out, as this very personal journey. And I knew I've been anxious for a while about like how that would feel to be out and to expose myself like that. And it's incredibly anxiety-inducing. It really is.
It's kind of funny because it's also what you're doing with your parties. Like, think about this. Everyone kind of walks around, and we're all like these seething masses of all manner of things at any given moment, but we hide it from everyone in these very complicated ways. And certainly sexuality is no exception. Like, if you go to a regular party, everyone would like to do what's happening at kinky salons, but they just kind of pretend that they don't want to do that. And so they put on this big charade in place. So it's really this kind of apocalyptic energy of that unveiling or uncovering, and just really taking those things which usually remain on the interior and then just displaying them in this very exterior fashion, which, like you said, it makes this kind of vulnerability, but there's also a very large source of power in these types of revelations. So it's a very...
And I think that's the reason why sexuality has been repressed for so many years, is because people's sexuality is like a microcosm of their personality. So it's a place where your issues really become apparent. Like if you have self-worth issues, they'll really come out in your sexuality. If you're like, a control issues or power issues, that'll really come out in your sexuality. And so people's sexuality is where you can really work on these more macrocosm issues that you have in your life and in your character and in your personality, and you can like get into the deepness of it. So I always call it like the velvet crowbar. It's like you just put that velvet crowbar in your consciousness, and it can really crack you open. It's a beautiful means of personal transformation. And so, definitely at Kinky Salon, people are a lot more raw, than they are. Most people are hiding just a little bit. That's why sexuality is hidden from culture, because it is incredibly powerful.
Another thing that I think is really a key to emphasize, and you mentioned a little bit about how, a lot of people go to these parties with not having the intention to have sex, and they're very freeing because, and it reminds me of, I remember the first time I went to a large, crazy, weird freak gathering. When I went to a rainbow gathering in like 1991, I was 18 or 22. And the weirdest thing was that there was a way in which, like, walking through that space, realizing that however weird or goofy or sometimes ridiculous some of the people were that I saw, that nobody really cared what I was doing or looking like or whatever. I did something, totally crazy or violent or something, that it didn't matter. I could take my clothes off. I could be wearing a dress. It just didn't matter. And there was this way in which all this armor that I didn't even know existed fell off me, because I didn't have to hold a certain kind of persona the way you do in a city, or even in a cool bar or cafe where you're used to going. There's still all of these rules and expectations around how you hold yourself. And that's one of the amazing things about certain kinds of festivals. Burning Man has that characteristic as well, although there are, expectations too. I mean, there always are subtle rules, but there is a sense of being sort of freed. And at Kinky Salon, what is particularly freed up is a sort of implicit game. You go to a typical cocktail party, even with cool people or whatever, there's this kind of sense, there's this lurking, seething, vibrating, sexual game or quest that's going on beneath the surface, at least for a lot of the people there. And it can make it sort of a little uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be great and playful and another, kind of form of expression, but it can also add a kind of edge of anxiety to the situation. And so going to an event where the sexuality is on the surface, that everybody is aware, walking through the door, that they are sexual beings and that sometimes they have sex and that they like sex, and that maybe they're interested in having sex that night, maybe with someone they didn't know, that's on the surface, it actually relieves this enormous amount of anxiety that we carry around, sort of unconsciously a lot of ways. And that's very liberating. That's a very liberating feeling.
Yeah, that's one of the surprising things about Kinky Salon. Like, it's really surprising to people when they come what a relief it feels like. You'd expect it to be the other way around. It's counterintuitive. People are scared to come. They're scared of how it'll be. They're anxious about what that world would look like and how they'll be involved. I have friends who are dear, close friends who are too scared to come to Kinky Salon. And yet when they come, it's completely different from how they expected. Like, all of the images that you have of sex parties and sex clubs, which are, some of them are accurate. Kinky Salon's not like that. There's something just like, oh, thank God, we can just be adults, it feels kind of like a relief. Like, let's just get the bullshit out the way. We're just a bunch of adults coming together, and, people might have sex, they might not, but the idea that it's all, the cards are on the table is definitely, how it feels. It feels like a relief.
Well, and it's so
Absolutely.
interesting because if you compare that with, like, fantasy or the way a lot of people drive their sexuality through objectification, which, of course, that's the fantasy that eliminates the other person's participation or existence. The difference of, like, being a grown-up and letting all those things go and those, like, fantasies that you need to get excited, it's almost like people operate sexually under this delusion that if they don't have a fantasy or like fetish or thing that they have that gets them interested, then they'll be a failure sexually. That to have the courage to just stand over in your sexuality is like being a lord of failure, of like all the possible things that could go wrong. You're just like, hey, how's it going? Let's hang out. Instead of having to make all these giant constructs in our minds in order to achieve a kind of sexuality we think is supposed to occur.
Right, and I think that's, it's a product of sexuality being repressed for as long as it has been. I mean, we've got like 10,000 years of cultural pressure weighing down on us at this particular period in time where this massive transformation is happening. And it's not surprising that it's fucked up. It's like the thing with Miley. It's like I have compassion for her. I'm not surprised that she's a fucked up kid and that she's just going crazy. And obviously, there's issues with the way that, she's presenting herself because, so-called, children don't have sexuality. And so you can't possibly have this expression of sexuality being exposing our children to twerking, It's like all of this stuff is just like, it's so ironic. It's like, if a kid sees someone twerking, I guarantee you they do not see it as sexual. They're like, what is that silly dance? Like, it's the adults that have a problem with it, not the kids. The kids are like, that's silly.
True. Totally true.
Yeah.
So what's happening with it? You mentioned the that more, kinky slums are appearing in different cities. How do you see this this culture moving beyond the San Francisco bubble?
Well, originally, when I first started writing my book, it was a how-to guide. The idea was that I was going to create a manual so that I could share it with people and they could start their own kinky salons in other cities. So, and then it developed into this huge project of this memoir, which I really wasn't expecting. But the manual exists, and I share it with these other event producers. And so it's not like a franchise. It's more like a network of similar experiences, you know. And I'm really open to having people open kinky salons in other cities, and I kind of give them a package to make it easy for them, and then give them the support and a network of other event producers to talk to. So I'd like to see the kinky salon events happening in more and more cities all over the world, replicating this experience so that more people can have it. Because ultimately, kinky salon has to, like, if kinky salon is too big, if the event is too big, it doesn't really work. I had an event the other day where there were 400 people, and it just wasn't a kinky salon. Like, it just didn't feel right. Once you get more than like 150, between 100 and 150 people, it starts to lose its integrity. And weirdly enough, that's actually the size of our tribe. So as hunter-gatherer primates, our tribe is something like 130, 140 people. And I think it has a lot to do with that, like how our brains process relationships. We can't process more than a certain amount of relationships at a time. And in one evening, if the event gets too big, it just gets overwhelming and it doesn't feel safe anymore. So in order to have more people experience these events, I can't just have more and more, I can't have bigger and bigger events. I have to have more events. So the idea of creating these different events in different cities, which are really, run by volunteers and very community spirited and very creative, and each taking their own lead. So each one is slightly different because of the people who are influencing it, because of the people who are the team making it happen. And it's kind of like a fascinating little cross-cultural exploration as well, because, like the difference between the London event and the New York event, it's like looking at the differences in sex culture in these different cities and what makes each city unique and what makes each country's sex culture unique as well. It's kind of a fascinating little petri dish of social experimentation.
Well, I mean, I know you have quite an extensive sort of guidebook already set up for these events to happen in other places, but I'm curious whether you could pull out just, a couple of the most important elements, the things you say, if it doesn't have this, it is definitely not a kinky salon.
Yeah, well, I do have a list of agreements.
Controlling or owning it.
There's a list of agreements that if you stray from these, then they're not a kinky salon. And one of them obviously is going back to sexual objectification. Like if you use too much sexual objectification in your promotional materials or during your cabaret, then I'll ask you to look at that. I've actually recently had to let one of the events go. The Amsterdam Kinky Salon was using pictures in their promotional materials that were just of very similarly bodied women, usually with some kind of phallic symbol like a gun or a lollipop or something.
Oh, God.
And it was like a catalog of objectification. And I would try and point it out to them like, hey, you guys, like this kind of imagery really doesn't work. And they really didn't understand the difference. They just didn't understand. They were like, but it's sexy. Like, we think it's sexy. And I was like, yeah, but that's not, you can't just use those kinds of images. Not that sexual objectification doesn't happen. I mean, the whole thing is sexual objectification is quite normal and natural, and it happens. And the percentage of time that it happens to men in our culture is probably healthy. Like every now and again, like, hell yeah, I'd like to see like the hot body of a man that I don't care about his personality. I'm just like, damn, that looks good, But it's the disproportionate percentage of female objectification that's the problem. And so, I like to mix it up with, different more diversity, more body types, different genders, different sexual orientations, and not necessarily just using these images of people as objects, either in the promotional materials or in the cabaret. Another thing would be inclusivity.
We just got to.
Hello?
No, I think he's cutting out. Uh-oh.
It's just in these other cities, other countries. Hello?
Hello. Sorry, we lost you for a second there.
Yeah, you cut out a little bit. Oh,
Let's go. That's fine. We just have a couple of minutes left.
Oh, now he's Erik, I'll just go ahead and say what I think they're going to say. We'll test my psychic abilities. We just have a couple of minutes left. Do you want to let folks know, where they can kind of find your book when it comes out and get access to further material? Should they go to your blog, or where do you prefer that they head?
Absolutely. There's my website is sexculturerevolutionary.com, and on that website you can get access to the book. And then there's kinkysalon.com, which is where you can find out about the events that are happening all over the world, and also where you can apply if you want to start your own kinky salon in your own town.
Oh, fantastic. So people can you want to start it like a movement kind of to help influence and spread the culture.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Polly, for being on the show today. We love having you every time and appreciate all of your inputs, and hopefully this will all help orchestrate a movement in the direction of more enjoyment of sexuality and less repression and objectification. Thanks so much. And from Maja Daou and Erik Davis here on Expanding Mind, we'd like to thank everyone for listening to the show today. Keep your minds open.